So, mae'n braf croesawu Sophie-Lee o'r yma heno. Da ni'n edrych ymlaen am o'i gyflwyniad. Diolch yn fawr. I always struggle with that word. So it's a pleasure to welcome Sophie-Lee to talk this evening on a specialist subject and the work that she's been doing as project leader with the Eagle Reintroduction in Wales. So I'll hand over to Sophie-Lee and enjoy.
Diolch yn fawr, Jim. And so, yeah, thank you for joining us this evening for this free webinar. So what I think, like Jim mentioned about structure, we'll obviously give you a presentation about our work with Eagle Reintroduction Wales. But first, I think Jim has got a few questions that you can interact. So we would like to know your thoughts before we start giving you the nitty-gritty of the ERW project. So it's just 3 simple questions. I think Jim would be better explaining how to connect to to answer these questions. And while you do that, I'll just give a little bit of an introduction to who I am. So I'm now a Dr. Sophie-Lee Williams. I've just finished my PhD with Cardiff University, and my PhD basically was designing the feasibility studies for bringing our native eagles back to Wales. And I first designed these. I've been working with raptors for 12 years now, and with eagles for 6. So yeah, I'm a raptor enthusiast really. I love working with raptors, being outdoors. So I really love being and working with eagles. And yeah, so what I'll do is I'll pass you over to Jim to answer these questions, and then obviously we'll give you a bit more in regards to a presentation of what the ERW project is all about.
Thank you, Sophie-Lee. If you can see my screen share there, it's something called Menti. It's an app called menti.com. So if you type that in, if you've got a QR code reader, you can flash that QR code, or just type in www.menti.com, and then the code for this is 7150333. And it's just your thoughts about, have you seen eagles in Wales before? So already 19 people have answered. That's fantastic. The code is at the very top of that screen that I'm sharing as well. So a lot of you, majority of you have seen eagles in the wild before, which is fantastic. The next question, we'll flick back to how much would you like to see these species back in Wales? So we've got the golden eagle and the white-tailed eagle. Okay, that's great. That's 28-30 responses. So very great, strongly agree with that. We're seeing them back in Wales. And then the third question is, do you have any concerns about releasing eagles in Wales? Just any thoughts that you had or any concerns, just so we can get a feel for where the audience is coming from this evening. You don't have to enter anything here at all. It's just gives good. There's a no. It's a good start. Persecution, yeah. Hunting. Yeah. Safety of the birds themselves, their protection. Persecution again. Effect on the ecosystem, yeah, introducing big species into livestock. Persecution from gamekeepers, safety of their species, compensation schemes for farmers, mixed feelings from other stakeholders, a prey base, so what they're going to eat. Is it hard without knowing the previous history and background, but that's why you're here, absolutely. Are they a natural species to the UK? Suitability of habitat, predators. So yeah.
It's good to know that most of the concerns we address in the talk, but just to reassure anybody, if we haven't answered any of these concerns, you know, during the presentation, then please feel free to fire questions towards the end. But no, it's nice to know what your thoughts are entering into the presentation. So yeah, I quite like that format. But Jim, shall I share my screen now and start the presentation?
Yeah, I'll put myself on mute as well. So.
Brilliant. Okay, so let me just share my screen with everybody. Share. There we go. Okay, so like I've already mentioned, my name is Sophie-Lee Williams, and I am the project founder and manager of the Eagles Reintroduction Wales project. So I've been working with Eagles now for 6 years, and I've been mentored by Roy Dennis. And in 2015, 2016, I was up in Scotland working with satellite tagged golden eagles. And really the idea of ERW was derived over a cup of coffee with Roy Dennis. I come back home then to Wales in 2016 and designed a 6-year feasibility study to restore these species. And in 2017, we were luckily enough to get 3 years of funding from Welsh Government's European Social Fund. And yeah, since 2017, we launched feasibility studies at Cardiff University under a PhD programme, which ends now this month, sadly. It's been a whirlwind of a journey, but we haven't done this alone. We have an extensive team of collaborations and experts, eagle experts, which are helping us develop this conservation programme here in Wales. And, you know, the likes of Cardiff University, Wildlife Trust Wales, Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation as well, and a number of British eagle experts and experts in Norway as well, which are official advisors on the project. So we're working with the likes of South of Scotland Golden Eagle Project and the Golden Eagle Trust. So hopefully today we will give you an insight of the evidence we've gathered and how feasible it is to release these species into the Welsh landscape. So what are the main aims for the ERW project? And the main aim is for us over the last 3 years has been to assess if modern Wales can still hold both the golden eagle and white-tailed eagle. And it's inevitable that the Welsh landscape has changed significantly since eagles last bred here over 150 years ago. But eagle reintroductions are not a novel concept. They have been suggested for many, many decades, but so far no action has been taken. And it's no wonder why Wales has been, you know, one of the top priorities to restore these species, simply because we have long stretches of coastlines and you know, mountain habitats which are able to sustain these birds. So over the next 40 minutes, we will be discussing how, why, what and when. How do we go about a reintroduction? Why are we proposing a reintroduction? What we need to consider, and more importantly, when will a reintroduction happen? So before we jump to the nitty-gritty of the ERW project, it would be rude not to introduce you to our native species to Wales, and Britain, of course. So there's 2 native species, golden eagle areriorad and white-tailed eagle areriomor. And both species really belong to a common family called the Acridae, which contains eagles, hawks and buzzards. And an eagle in lay terms is just a common name for many large birds of prey which are active during the day. And it's safe to say that both of our eagles tick all basic eagle boxes. They're big, they're brown, they have broad wings, and they're actively seen soaring high in the sky, dwarfing any other bird species that approach them. But both species belong to different family groups and really differ in their biology and ecology and even lifestyles. So, for example, the golden eagle is part of the booted eagle family, which are known for their various pursuit hunting strategies. So they like to chase their prey. So they're very efficient hunters. And research has shown that, for example, there's over 9 hunting strategies recorded for golden eagles. By contrast, the white-tailed eagle is part of our sea eagle family, and they're the largest birds of prey in Britain. They have over an 8-foot wingspan, so they're very large species, but they are very lazy species as well. So they have very different hunting strategies to golden eagles. They're more ambush hunters, and research has shown that 95% of their day is sat perched, probably waiting for food to come to them. So they do have very different lifestyles. They also have or occupy different habitats as well across their range. So, for example, the golden eagle across the globe mostly inhabits remote cliffs and mountains, like in Ireland, in Donegal National Park. But in Scotland, they also are quite a generalist species. So they can also inhabit coastlines, for example, and lowland areas as well. And their prey are mostly medium-sized ground-dwelling mammals and birds. But by contrast, the white-tailed seagull has a very different habitat. They are associated to aquatic resources, so coastlines, we're close to oceans, or inland, habitats close to inland lakes. So they normally are situated around a water body, and that's simply because of their diet. They have very different diets to golden eagles. In the spring, they mostly eat seabirds and fish. And then when seabirds migrate, for example, and it gets cold and fish are not available in the winter, they then switch to mammals and carrion. So they have very different behaviors. They also inhabit very different habitats, which make them a great complementary study species for whales. So how do we go about a reintroduction? It's not as simple as most people make out. You can't just click your finger and release these birds free willy-nilly into the Welsh landscape. Reintroduction programs are usually a strict and highly regulated licensing process. And in the case of Wales, the authority figure that we are working with to pass these licenses is Natural Resources Wales. And these license applications are usually in the form of multiple reports, really comprehensive reports hitting on the biological, environmental, ecological and socio-economical feasibilities of restoring these birds. So, can these birds biologically survive here in Wales? Is the environment suitable? What are the risks and benefits in regards to other biodiversity? And, do these species fit into, the current socioeconomic structure here in Wales? And these license applications, and it's particularly the case for both species, our applications are very, very different. And that's simply because every species have different critical dependencies on their habitats and their ecosystems, also on other biodiversity. So how do we know what questions to address? Well, there's a standard criteria for reintroduction programs across Europe, and they're all shaped by the IUCN reintroduction guidelines. So ERW's feasibility assessment and research has been shaped in accordance to IUCN and NRW requirements. So over the last 3 years, we've put our foot on the accelerator with gathering evidence, and we've managed to complete 50% of our feasibility studies, focusing on the biological and environmental feasibility. So that's what this is what I will be taking you through today. What evidence have we gathered to assess, how viable it is to restore these species? So let's start with the biological feasibility. So the main question around, or the main criteria really around the biological feasibility is whether a reintroduction is the most acceptable option for the species. Now, I mentioned earlier that both species hold high conservation protection across Europe and the globe. So what we need to really consider is, were eagles here in the first place? What caused their extinction? Has there been other reintroductions? Is this a novel concept, or can we gather evidence from other reintroductions? Why Wales? Why would the species benefit from a reintroduction in Wales? And where would we get our birds from? And the impact on, donor stocks. So we'll start with the history of eagles. So this is where, the journey started for us, is gathering historic evidence. So what we found is that eagles, the history of eagles across Britain were really, really well studied by the likes of Derek Yaldin and Richard Evans. But what we found was that there was only 25 records known for Wales originally, which was simply not enough to feed into a reintroduction programme or to provide evidence that they were native here. So what we've done is we gathered a number of Welsh resources, and as you can see, we have now got more than 25 records. And what we've found is that both the golden and white-tailed eagle were once a big part of our biodiversity, heritage and culture. So as you can see, we have historic records for every county across Wales, which suggests that they were once widespread and common in historic Wales. And we've also found that, they were a big part of our cultural heritage, because the Welsh word for eagle, arir, is incorporated into Welsh place names right across Wales. And we've also got evidence, archaeological evidence, I believe it was down in the Gower Peninsula, of white-tailed eagle bones actually dating back to the Neolithic period over 4,500 years ago. So it's safe to say that we now have got enough evidence to suggest to NRW that these birds were widespread and common throughout Wales, and we can restore them to their native or historic ranges. And that comes down to their cause of extinction. So why did they become extinct in the first place? And unfortunately, both eagles fell victim to ruthless hunting, a common trend which caused the declines and extinction of many, many raptors across Britain and Europe during the 19th century. And sadly, eagles were wiped out of the Welsh landscape by 1860, and there's no other evidence to suggest any other reason other than persecution that was responsible for the loss of our eagles. So we strongly believe that we have a moral duty to restore these species back to the Welsh environment, and there's many, many reasons why this would be of benefit. But one of the main IUCN criteria is not about finding out why these birds have become extinct, but whether the cause of extinction has been reduced or eliminated in Wales. And from research, persecution, historic persecution has significantly reduced across the whole of Britain, but persecution still happens. So according to RSPB data, over the last 12 years, there has been 1,329 recorded raptor persecution incidents in Britain. The highest recorded has been in England, as you can see here, 735 over the last 12 years, and followed by Scotland with over 400, and Wales only 85. So what this suggests is that raptor persecution isn't as prevalent in Wales than it is in England and Scotland. And there is a reason for that, and that's because of the difference in land use. So if many of you follow birds of prey persecution, for example, you'll know that most of persecutions are associated to driven grouse shoots. But we only have 1 or 2 driven grouse shoots in Wales. We don't have a big shooting industry in Wales at all. We only have around 55 shooting estates, which are sporadically distributed. Most of our land use is livestock pasture, for example. So we know that persecution isn't a prevalent problem in Wales, but it still does happen. So how we have gathered our evidence for NRW is we don't really have eagle populations in Wales to understand, persecution. So what we've done is we've assessed the distribution of other raptors, so ecologically similar raptors, so raptors that share nesting requirements or dietary overlap with golden or white-tailed eagles. And what we've done is we've had a look at their distribution and had a look at how they are using the Welsh landscape and how they are being influenced by persecution. And it's safe to say that our raptors in Wales are doing really, really well. We've got a wide distribution of red kites, and the yellow kernels in these graphs are the core breeding ranges of these species. So red kites are really widespread across Wales, also common buzzards. And something that we should be really proud of here in Wales is that we have got one of the highest density of natural breeding peregrines. So they're not, thriving. They are thriving in urban areas, but they're not reliant on urban areas. So this suggests to us that because our generalist raptors are doing really well, then persecution isn't really a significant problem. Also, with the natural colonization of our ospreys and hen harriers, so we've got a really, really good breeding population of hen harriers in Wales, over 36 breeding pairs, which is brilliant. So the natural colonization and the widespread distribution of these species provides irrefutable evidence that persecution has significantly reduced since historic times here in Wales. So what about other reintroductions? And like I said, reintroductions, eagle reintroductions in particular, are not a novel concept to Britain. They first, eagle reintroductions have been happening since the 1970s. So we'll start with white-tailed seagulls, because the white-tailed seagull was wiped out of Britain, completely wiped out by 1918. And the first reintroduction happened, and this is a photo of Roy Dennis in the 1970s. So the first release of white-tailed seagulls in Britain was on the Isle of Rhum, and a rolling scheme of reintroductions have helped this bird expand across the western coast and north coast of Scotland and the Outer Inner Hebrides as well. There's now over 120 to 130 breeding pairs over a 50-year period. So we've done really well. It's a conservation success story really in Scotland. The second reintroduction happened in early 2001-2003 to Killarney National Park, where birds were translocated from Norway, like they were in Scotland, to establish a breeding population in Southwest Ireland. And what happens now is that we have over 10 to 12 breeding pairs here since 2003. These birds have also been reintroduced to the East Coast now, and more recently in 2019, and here's a picture here of the Isle of Wight team, and Roy Dennis here, is from the 1970s. He's still going at it, reintroducing these birds to the Isle of Wight, which and if any of you are following the Isle of Wight blogs, this is what I've been doing most of through the pandemic, is following these birds. It's absolutely amazing. They're doing really, really well. So white-tailed eagles, there's a lot of reintroductions that we are working with experts across Britain to try to replicate this. to make a success in Wales, because Wales is now the only country that hasn't contributed to the conservation of this species. For golden eagles, it's a very different story. So golden eagles were never wiped out of Britain completely. They were wiped out of southern Britain, but in Scotland, a small population was founded in North Scotland in the late, I think, 19th, 20th century. And conservation and protection, you know, during that time has allowed the population to grow. And there's now over 528 breeding pairs in Scotland. So with there being such a healthy breeding population, they've been reintroduced to Donegal National Park in Ireland now, where there's now about 4 breeding pairs in Ireland. And in 2018, they've been translocated from Scotland down to southern Scotland, with a hope that they will recolonise northern parameters of Britain, or the southern parameters of Britain, sorry, in due course. So as you can see here, these are pictures from the release schemes in Ireland and Scotland. So we're working with most eagle experts, you know, to replicate this process for Wales. So we're not just making this stuff up, basically. So why Wales? So why would Wales be the most acceptable option for the species? So what we found is that because of the biology of both species, we know that there's no chance of natural colonisation to Wales, and we're talking about the next 50 to 100 years' time. And this comes down to the biology of the birds. So we know that they're long-lived species. So they normally live for about 30 years. I think for golden eagles, there was a bird found in 2018 that Roy Dennis tagged as a chick, which died of natural causes and was aged at about 36 years of age. So we know that these birds can live a long time. They also have very slow sexual maturity, so they don't mature and enter the breeding population until the age of 5. So for the first 5 years of their life, they are very nomadic, so they explore large parts of Scotland. For example, the Isle of Wight birds, white-tailed seagulls have been exploring from the Isle of Wight all the way up to Yorkshire moors, for example. So they do have quite a wide distribution in their first 5 years. But one of the biggest reasons why we know that they won't naturally colonise Wales is a life trait which is called natal philopatry. And what this means is that when they reach breeding age and enter the breeding population, they like to breed in close proximity to their natal areas. So almost like ospreys, where they go to other breeding eagles for, you know, security, safety, and the fact that they know that there's food around. And what this life trait does is make population growth rate very, very slow. So for example, since white-tailed eagles have been reintroduced to Scotland, it's taken 50 years to establish 128 breeding pairs, which is still considered as a small population. So, you know, because both breeding populations are so far north, we know that there's no chance of natural colonisation to Wales. And why we know that a reintroduction is the most acceptable option for the species is that when we release these birds, release sites are actually artificial natal areas. So just like the Isle of Wight reintroduction, when these new birds are released into the environment, they have a commitment to that area. So what we hope to do is, you know, release these birds in Wales. So then within 5 years' time, we will start to get breeding populations so that we can establish a breeding population in Wales. So we know that a reintroduction would be the most acceptable option to help the long-term conservation of this species across Britain. So what about donor stock? So where would we get our birds from, and would there be any impact on the long-term viability of populations if we take birds out? So we'll start with golden eagles first. And in the general practice for reintroduction programs for both species is to be releasing between 10 and 15 birds per year over a 5-year period. So that we'll be releasing between 60 to 70 birds in the Welsh environment to obviously trigger off that long-term sustainability. So in order to get 60 to 70 birds, we need a really good breeding population. So for golden eagles, we know that we have 528 breeding pairs in Scotland. So by taking youngsters, from the nest site, we know we won't have any immediate or long-term impact on the breeding population in Scotland. But with white-tailed seagulls, it is general practice that for reintroduction programs, one of the IUCN criteria is that we need to get our source population needs to be, the nearest population to Wales. So for white-tailed seagulls and golden eagles, that would be Scotland. But because the Scottish breeding population of white-tailed eagles is only 128, and they're already being used to top up England at the minute, we know that there could be potential damage to the long-term sustainability of the Scottish population if we take out 60 to 70 birds. So we would get our white-tailed eagles from Norway, because that's where the original birds were reintroduced into Britain, Scotland, Ireland, for example. So we would know that in Norway, it holds 60% of the world's white-tailed seagull population. So we know there will be no impact on that if we get them from Norway. So that's the general kind of census that we've created around our plans. So all in all, now that we know that eagles were native and common in Wales, we know that persecution is significantly reduced. We know that there's other reintroductions which we can replicate to make it a success. And we know that, there's no natural colonization, so it would very much be the most appropriate option to help the conservation of these species. And we know where we're getting our birds from, and we know there would be no impact on other breeding populations. So all in all, we know that a reintroduction to Wales is the most acceptable option for the species conservation, not only at a national level, but an international level as well. So what about environmental feasibility? And so this is really not about the species at all. It's about whether the Welsh landscape, so is a reintroduction the most acceptable option for modern day Wales? So, these questions really come around, is there enough suitable habitat here for them? What about modern day land uses? We've got land uses now that, historic eagles wouldn't have even come across before. Prey availability, is there enough prey in the environment? Nest sites, release sites, and conservation initiatives. So are they compatible with the conservation here in Wales? So we'll start by suitable habitat, because this was our next kind of venture really with the RW project. This was our next big kind of research project over the last 3 years. So what we've done is we've created species distribution models to highlight areas of focus in Wales. We've not only done this for Wales, we've done this for England as well, because, and Scotland, because we know that, England is void of breeding golden eagles, and most of England is void of white-tailed eagles as well now, apart from Isle of Wight. So we've really helped, we've created research to help the conservation of the species at a national level. And what we'd done really was work with eagle experts up in Scotland. We mapped nest sites, we mapped environmental features around those nest sites. We then assessed the trends and the characteristics of the habitats around that, and then remapped them you know, for England and Wales. So we've kind of, what we've done is we found out that there's 46% of Wales that is suitable for golden eagles, and 51% of our coastlines which are suitable for white-tailed seagulls. And what these maps have done is really set the base for our feasibility studies. So, for example, we've created now priority areas to gather regional evidence. So for golden eagles, we have 12 priority upland areas of focus, and we also are looking at lowland areas of Wales as well, and we'll come to that in a bit. But for white-tailed seagulls, we've got 14 areas of coastal priority, and we're also assessing, you know, how they would distribute inland in due course as well. But for white-tailed seagulls, you know, our release site would be within one of these 14 areas. So what about land use compatibility? And that comes now down to the regional assessments that we are gathering to assess the best eagle habitats across Wales. So if we take a look at golden eagle habitat across Wales, so we've got 12 areas of focus with our suitable habitats. But the proportion of suitable habitat in these regions does not mean that it's available for eagles to occupy today. And that's simply because of modern day land uses or perils from people, for example, like persecution. So what we've had to do is really assess how modern day Wales would influence golden eagles. So we've had a look at land uses which directly or indirectly affect golden eagle habitat. So one of the biggest land uses in Wales, 75% of Wales is allocated to livestock pasture. And what livestock pasture does is, especially in upland areas, and if it's, you know, if it's been used for historic grazing, we found that so for example in moorland habitats, that thick shrubby vegetation structure has changed to grass species, which has directly affected the availability of prey species in upland habitats. So this is something that we've taken into consideration, you know, within these regions of Wales. So what all of our feasibility assessments are in this format. We've mapped, you know, eagle habitat, which is in yellow, and then pastures, which are in green. We've had a look at the percentage of, or the intensity of pasture in each region. And then we've allocated these rank scores, which are able to pick out the best habitats and the worst habitats which are affected by these land uses. We've also had a look at commercial conifer plantations, because particularly for golden eagles, they like really open upland habitats. And what commercial conifer plantations have done is they've modified Britain since the 1950s, and they've created, you know, we've lost our open habitats to closed, dense canopy forests, which really, you know, cause eagles to struggle to hunt in and nest in, you know, especially for white-tailed seagulls. So, you know, this has changed 6 or 7% of our upland habitats in Wales. So this is definitely something that we've taken into consideration for golden eagles. Persecution, so raptor persecution incidents, we've also had a look. So these are, you know, persecution affects eagles directly by direct mortality, but also can displace eagles as well. So we've had a look at the proportion of, or the intensity of raptor persecution in each region. And as you can see, Snowdonia holds, you know, no raptor persecution at all, and the Cambrian Mountains as well. And this big red splodge here actually is Glanysg Estate down in the Brecon Beacons, where 15 out of the 82, I think off the top of my head, recordings are correlated with just this one estate. So, you know, this really helps us now with risk assessments as well moving forward. But not only assessing land use intensity, but we've also assessed displacement. So, you know, for urban areas cover only 4% of Wales. So put it this way, there's more commercial conifer plantations in Wales than there are urban areas in regards to terrestrial cover. So, you know, 60% of our population is in South Wales, which leaves quite a lot of rural areas for golden eagles. So we've assessed how much historic habitat has been lost to urban areas, and golden eagles are extremely elusive, so they won't really, you know, be seen soaring over the skies of Cardiff, for example. Wind farms is also another modern land use which displaces eagles. So for golden eagles in particular, they can displace any wind farm over 6 wind turbines can displace eagles up to 4 kilometres. So we've assessed how much habitat has been lost to wind farms as well. So with all of this kind of modern land use in mind, this is what the historic habitat loss looks like. So for golden eagles, you can see, you know, by assessing modern day features, you know, our current situation is that, you know, upland habitats are quite fragmented for golden eagles. We've lost around 5.3% of historic habitat to modern day land uses. And for white-tailed seagulls, you know, they're less affected by some of these land uses. So there is generally a lot more habitat available for them, and, you know, less fragmentary. So 4.9% of historic habitat has been lost for white-tailed seagulls, which leaves 41.7% of available habitat, although be it kind of quite fragmentary. There's still pockets of available habitat for golden eagles to occupy today, and 45% of our coastlines are still available for white-tailed seagulls. What about nest sites? So for nest sites, we've also mapped potential nest sites for both species. So for golden eagles, especially up in Scotland, 96-97% of them prefer to nest in mountain crags or coastal crags. So we've had a look at, you know, we've mapped crags really, crag availability across Wales. So as you can see here, you know, Upper Snowdonia National Park holds the most nest sites for golden eagles. You know, most of Snowdonia is you know, holds quite a lot. You know, Cambrian Mountains, the Llangollen and Berwyn Ranges, even all the way down to the Brecon Beacons, you know, has nest sites suitable for golden eagles. But for white-tailed eagles, they're more generalist species, so they do prefer to nest in trees. So we've had a look at coastal, we've also had a look at inland as well, but we've had a look at coastal mature trees. So one of the highest, I think, is Pembrokeshire National Parks. There's quite a lot of tree nest sites available for them down here. The Gower Peninsula, Carmarthen Coast, Ceredigion, and the Isle of Anglesey as well has plenty of tree nests for them. But if they don't want to choose trees, we've also had a look at coastal crags as well. So Isle of Anglesey, I think, comes up at the top. So we've got, you know, plenty of coastlines on Isle of Anglesey for them to occupy. The Llyn Peninsula, plenty of nest sites as well, you know, and you can see here from Madawch or Mawdach and the Duffy all the way down to Ceredigion as well. There's no doubt that there are plenty of nest sites here for both species. So prey availability. So we have currently assessed our bird populations and mammal populations. We've yet to have a look at carrion availability and fish availability, but we'll take you into you know, our evidence really for prey densities across Wales. So I'll try to explain this table to you because these numbers probably don't mean anything. They don't mean much to me. But so what we've done is we've assessed prey availability of each prey item across each region in Wales. So 1 to 12, you know, is in reference to our upland habitats. And we've also had a look as well here at lowland areas, which we've labelled 13. But these numbers won't mean anything until I put these colours in. So what the colours mean is anything green is suitable, you know, so there's enough prey source to sustain eagles, and anything red, you know, there's not enough prey. So as you can see, there's quite like land use for golden eagles, prey availability is also quite fragmentary. So one of the top areas for prey availability for golden eagles is lowland Wales. So there's plenty of prey sources in lowland Wales for golden eagles. We've also got upper and central Snowdonia, so 11 and 10 here, hold sufficient prey base. The Cambrian Mountains for number 7 here, and the Black Mountains and Hay-on-Wye, which are these small areas here as well. So they're quite fragmented, like land use, but still pockets of food available. But for white-tailed seagulls, we could start seeing a very different story. So there's a lot more green zones, rows, columns, I mean. So as you can see here, Isle of Anglesey comes up, which is number 11 here, as the top, you know, area for prey for white-tailed seagulls. You know, we've also got 7 to 9, which is Duffy, Mowdach and Glas Lynn. And we've also got Pembrokeshire National Park, which is, you know, also has, you know, quite an abundance of prey available. And also, quite surprisingly, the Gower Peninsula, which surprised me when I first kind of delved into these results. So a lot more prey availability for white-tailed eagles compared to golden eagles. So what about release site? So what we've done is we've just shown you visual maps of this exact data. So this is a table. This is the table format of the data that we've just showed you with our habitat loss, land use intensity and available resources. So what we can see here really is, you know, fragmented pockets really of Wales for golden eagles. And like I said, they're the same areas that I've just shown, but I wanted to show you in this format because for white-tailed, because the release areas that we will be focusing on now moving forward, there's 3 areas which we kind of say they're best habitats for golden eagles in Wales, and that's Upper Snowdonia National Park, Central Snowdonia National Park and the Cambrian Mountains. So these are basically the areas where we will be now conducting ecological and socioeconomic feasibilities, our assessments basically. And for white-tailed seagulls, and the reason why I wanted to show you in this table format is because you can see here that we've got less fragmentary habitat from Pembrokeshire National Park all the way up to the Isle of Anglesey. So all of the southwest and northwest coast is suitable for white-tailed seagulls, which leaves us, you know, when we have a look at our land use compatibility and prey availability, which leaves us with much more release sites to select from. You know, the Isle of Anglesey, all the way from Glas Lynn, Mowdach and Duffy to the Pembrokeshire National Park. These 5 areas now will be our main areas of focus for our next assessments. What about conservation initiatives? So it's really important that, you know, the reintroduction of these birds are fit into conservation initiatives here in Wales. And both species hold high conservation protection under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So basically their roost site and nest sites should be protected. So if we reintroduce these birds, then they would have direct benefits on other biodiversity because these birds hold quite large territories. So by protecting their territories like roost sites and breeding sites, we will also be protecting other biodiversity in these areas. But what we found is that most of the habitat requirements by both of these species are already enlisted as priority habitats across Wales. So really, by reintroducing these species, we won't only be reintroducing native biodiversity, but we will be bringing back ecosystem functions which will help, you know, biodiversity health, you know, in these high priority areas, and also habitat quality as well. But not only, so by reintroducing these species would bring added conservation benefits to Wales, but we've also found that by reintroducing the species, there's already conservation initiatives already in place that will help these species long-term survival. So what these maps show is, suitable golden eagle habitats here in yellow and for white-tailed eagles in blue, but in orange, these are maps of all the protected habitats across Wales. So as you can see, there's plenty of eagle habitat that already lies within protected habitat in Wales. So we know that a reintroduction would be fitting to conservation initiatives here as well. So all in all, with our biological and environmental feasibility, we know that there's plenty of habitat here for them. So we know that a reintroduction would be an acceptable option for Wales, but we also know that a reintroduction is an acceptable option for the conservation of the species as well. So over the last 3 years, we didn't really know whether this was a viable option, but now we can confidently say that there is a viable option for Wales. So this comes down to our last slide, really. When will a reintroduction happen? So by working with eagle experts, and sharing knowledge and general practice, most of these projects have taken about 6 to 7 years to gather enough evidence to pass a license to start releasing these birds. So that's, from start to finish, really. So we are 50% through our feasibility studies at the minute, which means that we're on track to meet this 6-year time frame. And from our evidence, it's safe to say that we will be starting with white-tailed seagulls. They're much more compatible species to the Welsh landscape. And we do have concerns about, the fragmentary status of our upland habitat. So what we are doing, while we're working on white-tailed eagle, completing our white-tailed eagle license applications, we are working with the likes of Welsh Government and conservation enterprises to create awareness around the feasibility of golden eagles coming back. So we're enlisted them as priority species to be released while we're working on current conservation issues with upland habitat quality and prey availability, for example. So the next steps of the RW project is, in these release sites now, we need to complete regional analysis. And what we mean by regional analysis is we've got our ecological assessments left. So how will these birds influence other biodiversity? So especially our protected biodiversity, our wintering and breeding species. That's something that we will be launching now across, for white-tailed eagles across these 5 priority areas in Wales. And it's also one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest parts of this project moving forward is working with local communities and stakeholders. We've done light work, over the last 3 years with stakeholders and communities, but now putting our foot on the accelerator to really bring community and stakeholders on board with this journey. And of course, working with our team to actually plan the translocation itself, which is the most exciting part. So that's what we have left, all in all. So so that comes to the end of our talk. So diolch yn fawr yn wrando. Thank you very much for listening, and I suppose we can open up for questions now.
Thank you, Sophie-Lee. That was fantastic. I mean, you've answered a lot of the concerns and the questions that people had at the very beginning. So yeah, fascinating. I'm just wondering when we're going to see them, and it sounds like they could be quite imminent, really, which is brilliant. It's great to know they're going to return home. There's one question from Carol Jacobs about the birds when they're released, about their territorial behaviour. Will they stay where they're released, or do they move or migrate from their release site? Yeah, so say for example, if we choose, the Isle of Anglesey is just a theoretical scenario. If we release these young birds on the Isle of Anglesey, like they've done for the Isle of Wight, we expect them to have a wide range across Wales for the first couple of years. So
so they will have a wide distribution. And then, you know, not until the birds are settling to breed will they then start settling in the you know, into these release sites. So yes, all in all, you know, they would have a wide distribution at first if we release them.
Fantastic. Peter Lamont, the reintroduction of the red kite to England and Wales seemed to be very successful. Do you expect it to be a successful reintroduction when it happens in Wales?
Yes, for white-tailed seagulls, you know, they are less challenges, you know, like the evidence shows, really. So we do believe, you know, like you know, the red kite success story and the white-tailed eagles up in Scotland and Ireland, which have also been successful. You know, we expect the Welsh reintroduction to be on par with those conservation efforts and schemes.
Excellent. Brilliant. There were two comments about Glanusk, about what happened there and why it's so contentious, and is there any you know, what are the main reasons behind there being a problem? Is it a culture, really? I think is one of the
well, I think Glanusk is a pheasant shooting estate, so I suppose it depends on, you know, the ethos and work ethics in these estates. Not all estates have anti-predator attitudes, and there's some hot spots, you know, that that can suggest that, you know, the bird persecution happens more than what it should. But yeah, so there's been about 15 birds recorded, you know, at Glanusk estate, and they're mostly been poisoned, I think, poisoned. So yeah, so that's all I know really about the Glanusk persecution, but I know that a large proportion of the recorded persecutions are just associated to that one estate, but it still happens sporadically, you know, across Wales as well. So yeah, it's a particular cause of concern which we can mitigate for by bringing the community and these stakeholders on board and addressing their concern before we release these species.
Yeah, exactly. Like reaching this audience tonight, it's that public engagement, isn't it? That's really trying to get on board. So yeah. From Sean Harris, is there available evidence showing the economic benefit to sheep farmers in Scotland? Do you know?
Economic benefit to sheep farmers? Does he mean like a compensation scheme? Because or does he mean the economic benefits to the region in general? Because for example, white-tailed seagulls on the Isle of Mull bring in £5 million a year just through tourism. So, you know, they would be an economic benefit, you know, for these regions if we did reintroduce these species, for example.
Okay. Is there a risk? So I'm just reading some of these messages coming in now from Andy Copsey. Will the introduction help with other eco functions other than being an umbrella species?
Yeah, so these species bring over 8 or 9 different ecosystem functions, you know, from resource linkers. So what, you know, so what resource linkers do is, you know, because they forage in a certain habitat and then breed in a different habitat, they are sharing resources, you know, and nutrients between habitats. You know, these species are, you know, very good at scavenging, so they bring a cleanup service as well. They're really good at controlling disease in you know, for example, in rabbit populations. So there's a list of benefits, you know, other than being iconic and charismatic species, that they can bring, and what we've been missing for years and years and years across the Welsh landscape.
That's really interesting. Brilliant. It's the perception, isn't it, that they have a, you know, what you said about their helping reduce infections in, or you know, in the rabbits. That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
One question from Chris Muscat about funding, and I know that's something that's a bit of an issue with ERW in Wales, isn't it?
Yes. So since the pandemic, we, you know, the kind of further progress of our work has been halted. You know, we've really struggled like many other businesses, but also like many other conservation projects, conservation and government funds have been closed, until April next year. And yeah, so we've really been struggling with funding, and there is a big question mark around whether we can continue the research, in the upcoming months. We do have a crowdfunder open, which I think that we will email around if you want to support our work moving forward. But yeah, we're really waiting until April until these government and conservation funds open back up.
Is there a risk? So this is from Kim Parry. Is there a risk of objections from landowners or other stakeholders, or have they been dealt with?
So that this is why it's so important to to address the concerns of stakeholders and put management and post-release monitoring schemes in place. It depends on what that private landowner, the industry behind that really. We expect to have, we have spoken with NFU, Wales and Cymru. So we know that they're happy with our slow and considered approach. And we've been transparent as possible, over the last couple of years. We're not releasing these species anytime soon. We wanted, to make sure that we are gauging stakeholder attitudes, or private landowners' attitudes towards releasing these species. It's really the welfare of the species that we're concerned about, rather than how quickly they can be released. So this is something that's a big part of our next phase. Then it is to start addressing private landowners' concerns, like farmers, for example, gaming estates, and so on.
Yeah, no, and a similar comment just coming from Peter Lamont, who sounds very fortunate to have been brought up in the north of Skye and remembers a breeding pair of white-tailed eagles at the back of their house from his childhood, but then they disappeared in the 90s. So his concern is about the reintroduction and the sheep farmers, and who don't necessarily see the tourist benefit, but just that maybe a loss of livestock. So it's that conflict, isn't it, that trying to resolve with the these birds don't bring significant damages to livestock at all. It really is dependent on food availability and historic land use, really. So for example, the carrying capacity of these eagles, they can't carry anything over 5 kilograms. And if you think of a newborn lamb, a newborn lamb is born at 5 kilograms mostly. So it's already reaching the upper carrying capacity. So we don't expect them to have a big impact on livestock. But what we are willing to do really is work with farmers on management strategies post-release, because farmers are going to be a big part of our post-release monitoring scheme. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I think that just about covers the chat. A couple of people have asked if they could have a copy of the slides. So if that's possible, I can share a link with them afterwards. I often share comments, and I'll share your crowdfunding link as well, if that's okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, you're very welcome to share the slides. I'll send you the link after.
Fantastic. So that's just over an hour. That's fantastic. I have just got a slide to share with you, just to finish up this. So I think.
Oh, do you want me to stop?
No, I think it's just jumped over to mine. Has it just jumped over to mine?
Yes. Yeah, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you. So let me just go forward on that. So just to wrap up, those of you who don't know me or Nature's Work, my business that I run, you can follow me on various social networks. I also run workshops which will be returning next year, so you can check out through my website or the social links there. And I've got a shop, and it's Christmas, and I thought I'd give you all a nice Christmas discount of 10%. So there's a code. If you typed in Xmas 2020, if you were wanting a couple of products, I've got playing cards and a book on the Alps and various things. So if you did fancy, then follow the link natureswork.co.uk to the shop. That will take you, and then remember the code. So thank you for that. And a thank you to Sophie-Lee, really. And one really lovely way I'd like to finish my webinars is to just have a kind of slide at the end, a reflection. So as we did at the very beginning with the Mentimeter, I've got another one here. So if you would like to, then you can click the QR code, and it takes you straight to there's 2 questions or 2 statements. If you follow on a web browser, menti.com 514338, it will take you to how you've learned, on reflection, what you used to think something, and now maybe your attitude or your thoughts have changed on reflection of eagles and their reintroduction, or anything about eagle and their ecology. So the code is at the top of that screen again. So it's 514338. So you hope to see them soon. That's good. I hope to see them soon. It sounds like North Wales could be quite a good reintroduction site for both species.
Yes, yeah. Well, it really gets me excited to talk about Isle of Anglesey and white-tailed seagulls, because because I think that would be just absolutely fantastic to see them up there. Also the Mawdach as well, Mawdach estuary, and even the likes, because I'm from South Wales, I'd love to see them on the Pembrokeshire as well, you know. So in time, you know, just by releasing them in one area, you know, in time, might be talking about a few decades, but you know, they would be abundant across the coast. So
I don't know if you can see all those comments there, some really interesting comments coming in about what you used to think. You thought it'd be difficult to reintroduce them to Wales, but now you think it's very hopeful, not a risk to livestock. You think you'll be seeing them in the next couple of years. Cymru am bydd. They are, but without understanding the benefits they bring. So yeah, it's possible to see them in Wales in your lifetime. So yeah, it's lovely. It's a really positive story, and one of great benefit to conservation in Wales, really, the reintroduction of another key species, or 2 key species. So again, if there's anything that pops up or through the chat that is worth sharing, then I'll share that in an email with you all later. So do check John Cole, send it out to a bunch of emails each time. So Sophie-Lee, I'd just like to say thank you once again.
No, thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming and listening. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you very much all, and thank you, Jim, for inviting me. I really enjoyed it. It's nice to see people's comments as well. So yeah.
Superb. I'll share those with you and afterwards. But yeah, so for now, we had the rescheduled archaeology webinar from last Thursday. Will be rescheduled for next Thursday. So again, it was fully booked. There may be the odd place available, but if you aren't coming next week, I wish you all a very happy Christmas and the best for the next year. Yeah, have a lovely evening. Bye-bye for now.